Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm your host, Ian Fisher. We've got a really great show lined up for you today. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the myths associated with the UC application system. We'll unpack how you might have the talk with your kids. Not that talk, but the one about paying for college and the cost of college and how you're going to finance that education in our third segment. So you won't want to miss that. But before we get to either of those two topics, we want to talk a little bit more about athletic recruitment. Now, this is something that we unpacked about a month and a half ago with my colleague Ken and Dick here on the show. And he and I had a great conversation about how to engage with athletic recruitment. Today, we are welcoming one of our newer members to the College Coach Education team, Jay Bonham. Hey, Jay, how's it going?
It's going great, Ian. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm glad to have you here. And one of the exciting things I think about adding new experts to our team is benefiting from all of the terrific experience that you've had. I was just reading the bio that we have for you up on our website, and there's so much great content there. I can see that you were an athletic liaison at Hamilton. You have read applications for at least 4 different institutions. And we're excited about that expertise, but you're actually here today for a slightly different reason, which is that your son went through the athletic recruitment process and is a student athlete right now. Do you want to just introduce us to him so that the listeners know a little bit about where you're coming from on this topic?
Yeah, of course. When my friends from college and high school know that I was an athletic liaison, they sort of joke because I myself was not much of an athlete. And I actually joke on how I was cut from my intramural basketball team in college, but it was a great experience. And so I was able to work in college admissions for many years. And one of my main roles was working as an athletic liaison. But then I find myself having a son who is growing up and loving the sport of football, but doing other things as well. Mm-hmm. And got to a point where there was a possibility that he might be able to continue that in college. And so even with all of my experience, it still is a little different when it's your own son. But I'm certainly was very pleased that he did the process correctly. He found a place that wanted him as a student and as an athlete. But also a place that he really fell in love with. And so, certainly we can talk a little bit more about that process, but he is a junior in college at this point at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, and is having a wonderful experience. And both my wife and I are just thrilled that it's worked out well for him.
I remember we were talking about doing the radio show segment a couple of days ago, and you said he's a sophomore. Wait, no, he's a junior. It's like these things just happen so quickly. And I want to go back a little bit in the story, back to just early high school. And that might feel like yesterday to you. Obviously, it was a few years ago in real time. So he started playing high school football, I would imagine. And at what point did you get the sense that he was really good at this thing? Or when did he start to feel like, hey, this is something that I actually got some talent in?
Right. So he started, we'd moved from upstate New York to Ohio to start in advance of his freshman year. And so where we lived in central Ohio, football is big. Yeah. And so, he was put into a position where he had great competition around him. And to be quite honest, he's a big kid. Uh-huh. And so certainly from a physical aspect, that was something that was helping his thought that maybe he would be able to compete. We did not have visions of Division I big time athletics. We knew that was not going to be something that would be available to him, because he certainly was a very good athlete in high school, but was not going to be at that level. Okay. And to be honest, as parents, we weren't sure if we would want that for him anyway. We wanted him to have a real college experience. So really around like sophomore year, I think he was starting to think that, okay, this could be a possibility. And so he started to reach out to different coaches. But the bulk bulk of the recruiting, of course, did not start until the summer between his junior and senior year, with some activities happening that spring of his junior year. And so in some ways, his process mirrored a lot of other students who are not looking to play a sport, but it is definitely more condensed because he was, I think, had a feeling as though he wanted to find a school and do it on an earlier time frame.
You just sort of in your language alluded to a distinction that I think might be helpful for those parents out there who have kids that are athletes and are starting to think a little bit about whether athletics might be a part of their college experience, right? You said probably wasn't going to be a D1 fit. And I think that centers on this idea of, well, are you big enough, fast enough, strong enough to compete at that level? It's a very different level. And especially when we're talking about football. But I also think you sort of alluded to this idea of a more traditional college experience versus one where athletics are more central to your everyday life on campus. You have to go to practices. The games are really, I mean, they're on TV. There's a lot of money that's invested in. Like, it's a very different thing to be at Alabama versus McAllister when it comes to football. How should parents and students kind of think about that distinction? Is it something that naturally plays out based on the talent of the student, or is it something that you have to have a little bit more of an intentional thought process about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it plays out athletically, and just the way that you as a student are developing through high school. Certainly, I think you want to take into account feedback you get from not just your own coaches, but as you start to talk with other coaches, I think things start to shift. And so people come to a point in realization that, okay, maybe I could try Division I level. But for us, and I think for a number of kids who look at Division III, is that they certainly want that to be central to their experience. Like, this is going to be a big part of their college experience. And just as you alluded to, Ian, I mean, it's not the same as if you're on TV every Saturday. However, it's still a big time commitment. And so you have to be ready and prepared to do that. But at the same respect, I mean, he and a lot of other Division III athletes have the ability to go and be involved in other clubs, other organizations. My son's going to have an opportunity to study abroad in the spring.
Oh, cool. So that's great.
That kind of thing probably is really more difficult when you're looking at some larger programs where it is your main focus and your only focus.
Yeah. I want to move into just sort of, you're talking about kind of these conversations that students are having with coaches as they're starting to think about this athletic process. And I think it's really interesting, with athletics, typically you would peak around your senior year, but by that point, you've already submitted applications. You've already made decisions about where you might consider attending. And you said that your son's conversations with coaches were happening in that summer between junior and senior year. What was the nature of those conversations? How did he initiate them? And what was the balance between, assessing the program versus assessing the institution of higher education, right? So you're looking at a school, of course, but you're also looking at a coach and teammates and an athletic program. How did he balance those things? How did he begin those conversations? There's a lot of questions in there.
And those are great topics. And I think, first of all, I mean, he was coming from a place where he had two parents, for better or for worse, have been working in college administration, college admissions for many years. And so he was brought up visiting different colleges and talking with different people on college campuses. So he was familiar with that. I mean, as the communication started, I mean, a lot of it had to do with just sort of reaching out, and I wouldn't necessarily call it cold calling, but certainly reaching out to coaches with, I'm really interested in learning more about your program. Here's my Huddle account, which is like the video clips that students can prepare.
I've heard of that one.
The biggest thing for him, though, was really having an opportunity to do some of the prospect camps where, I mean, we spent part of our summer, going to different colleges and doing individual prospect camps. For football, there's some really big ones. There's one in the Boston area called New England Elite, which is a big sort of camp that brings kids in from all around the country.
Mhm.
And so those kind of sessions allowed him to interact with coaches, and that's actually where he first made contact with what will now become his current coach.
With respect to those prospect camps, this idea kind of occurred to me that in a traditional college search for a student who's not considering athletics, visits to campus are really critical because you want to see campus, you want to get a sense for what the layout is, what the vibe of the institution is. But for students who are looking at athletics, they might have these camps or showcases or other opportunities where they have to get in front of coaches in order to be known, to be a known quantity in the recruitment process. How do students who are interested in athletics balance those two things? I mean, that's a commitment of travel in sometimes different directions. I mean, the idea that you would meet the McAllister coach in New England seems a little bit,
Right.
unexpected. So how do you balance those things when you are looking at both of them as a parent, especially where you're prioritizing, making those choices?
Yeah. I mean, certainly for him, I mean, the biggest priority for us as a family was education, no matter what. I mean, we wanted to find a place that Charlie would be challenged academically, but also athletically. And
Mhm.
so that was very important to him as well. So certainly those were the conversations he would have with coaches about different academic programs, about the support that would be there for student athletes if it was necessary for them. But I think to find the balance is, I mean, you're right. I mean, some of the visits that we did to colleges were mainly um, athletic visits where we'd meet with coaches and they would take us around campus. But we also made sure that for some schools that we did the regular admission information. So go and do the tour information session, and then we would go meet with the coach. And
Mhm.
then the coach, would, of course, would want to take us around campus in general, and that's fine. Um, but that I think is the biggest thing. And the other thing that I mentioned I told our son is that the most important thing is that you want to find a school that you really, really love. And then you also want to find a coach who you really, really like.
Yeah.
And the reason I mention this is because he actually finds himself in a position where his coach is leaving for very good professional and personal reasons, but he's not going to be entering the transfer protocol and like deciding when to go some other place. I mean,
Yeah.
he has made a commitment to McAllister. And so I think that is important for student athletes and for parents too, to recognize that you want to support your son or daughter and you want them to continue with their dreams to go and give it a try athletically. But at the end of the day, you still want to pick an institution that you're picking for the right reasons, the academic reasons, the cultural reasons, the institutional reasons.
Yeah.
Those are the things that you want to be your focus.
That's great. We've got a few more minutes. I want to get you into this mindset where you had this experience as an athletic liaison for an admission office, and now your son is applying for admission to schools where undoubtedly there are athletic liaisons that are communicating with the coaches. Was there any kind of advice or insight that you were able to give your son that maybe other student athletes might not have access to help him feel better about the process or better understand the process? Anything that you felt was really key for him in seeing how things were going to unfold with McAllister?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing is what, of course, we harped on right from the beginning of high school is your academics come first.
Mm-hmm.
Because regardless of your athletic ability, coaches are looking for kids who they know they're not going to have issues with academically.
Yeah.
And so, from as an athletic liaison, that was also, I mean, something I was looking at when I was evaluating transcripts for coaches. I mean, I'm not looking at their athletic ability. I'm looking at their ability to contribute academically to our community. And so that was certainly something that I always kept telling Charlie is that, I mean, whatever happens with athletics, great, but just keep working hard, get the
Yeah.
good grades, and that's going to help you in that when it comes to the recruiting process as well.
So if you can take care of that academic piece, it makes it so much easier, right? For the
Yes.
admission office to go to a coach and say, we would love to have Charlie on our campus. We're
Yep.
glad that you're interested in him for football. That's a way that we can make you happy, but it also makes us happy because we're happy to have him as a community member.
Exactly, and it helps the coach out because it's one less kid that the coach knows they're going to have to worry about with regard to their academic performance and how they're going to have their transition to college. So it can be a real benefit to the school in general.
It's just a great reminder, I think, for any student that's aspiring to be a college athlete, that really put those academics first, because it helps make things so much easier. In the last minute or so that we have, how is it going for Charlie? Is he enjoying playing football? Is he enjoying McAllister? Like, what's his just general take now that he's there?
I mean, it's funny, when he came back from his recruiting visit, when he was applying, he got off the plane and told us, "I found my people."
Yeah.
And that is something that you hope as a parent that you find, that your kid will find that when they go to a school. And that's been the case for him for his 3 years. And I know will be for all 4 years. He's having great academic experience. Athletically, he's being challenged, and it's been fun for him. But I think more importantly, we've been able to see the growth in him as a person, which as a parent, that's what you want.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, thanks so much for coming and breaking the ice for your first time here on the show.
It's my pleasure.
I'm sure we'll have you back many more times. And it's just a really fortunate position for us as educators that we have so many experts who have students who are going through this process, whether it's Beth and her son, who's thinking about applying this year, you and your son, who's in the athletic recruitment process. This is just awesome to have. So thanks a lot for being on the show, Jay.
It's my pleasure, Ian. Thanks again.
All right, folks, when we come back, we are going to talk about common myths that are associated with the University of California system, and we look forward to unpacking those with you after the break.